behind the curtain. Right there. There. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games. And we have the unique opportunity to talk about a sweet game also that I worked on. Because today we're talking about Astrea, Six-Sided Oracles, which I've been talking about for weeks on end. Because we announced the release date, months, to be honest. We announced the release date. The release date came out. It's now in the wild. It's kind of blowing up on, on Steam, which I'm pretty happy about. We've had about 1,000 concurrent users for the whole weekend, which is pretty great, which is pretty PogChamp, as they say.
Just to get these disclosures out ahead of time, you are head of marketing for the publisher of Astrea.
That is correct. I'm head of marketing for Akupara Games. We published Astrea. I played Astrea and I immediately wanted to publish it. I mean, I could talk about, I guess, like the story of that at some point in the not too distant future, in the podcast or whatever. But yes, so for disclosure purposes, I do materially benefit from promoting my own game.
Yeah, and not that I benefit in any way, shape, or form, but I do technically have a testing credit on it. So I guess I should probably say that too. But we're gonna talk about the gameplay because it's a really fun game. Before any of that, I fell in love with it at PAX East when you guys had the booth set up. It was fantastic. Love the art style. Love the game. It's funny going back because at some point the update wiped all my save progress.
Yep.
And I just kind of flew through rebeating everything. It took me a handful of attempts the first time on a lot of the characters, but this time it was oh yep, one and done for all of them. And then I one and done on Solarius the last I'm trying to avoid spoilers.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, sure.
I guess mild spoiler warning. I don't know if it's a huge spoiler, but there is a secret in Astrea.
See, the worst kept secret of all time. At the end of every run, you see, more and more unlocking this secret.
Yeah. But yeah, it's you want to lead the conversation? What do you want to talk about?
I guess it's funny because we also did one of these for Zoetti, and I think of these as two really interesting counterpoints to one another. I obviously love both games, and I have a lot about Zoetti that I think is great. But I think Zoetti and Astrea are kind of two mirrors in a way, because so my overall pitch for the difference between Zoetti and Astrea. In Zoetti, you have 3 characters, not 6, and you have really a handful of ways to build them, not too many, right? But the encounters are really varied, right? You have a longer run. The run is 6 instead of 3 sort of paths, right? And the power that you gain over the course of Zoetti is truly monumental, right? When you end a game of Zoetti, I feel like a level 20, it feels like going from level 1 to level 20 in a D&D or something along those kinds of lines, right? And that feels really great, right? So it's kind of it's length and it's very enemy focused. Astrea is sort of the opposite. Astrea, you have 6 characters, all of whom can be built in pretty wildly different ways. Most characters will have kind of I want to say 3 to 5 sort of viable quote unquote builds, right? In order to make them work. But it's the enemies who are kind of more or less the same, right? There are 3 levels that you move through, all of whom have one of 2 bosses. The enemies that you fight kind of up to that, it's one of 2 or one of 3 guys sort of thing. You end up sort of fighting the same enemies kind of over and over again. But the fun is in approaching the same problem with a radically different skill set, right? So Zoetti is kind of, you have the same skill set every time, but you're fighting pretty different enemies, and you have to figure that out. Astrea is, you're fighting the same enemies, but your skill set is pretty different and pretty unique. And I just think all of that is part of what makes them interesting kind of companion pieces for one another, and like the design inherent in them is kind of interesting. But I don't know. We talked about Zoetti a couple of months ago. I wanted to start off with that comparison just because it is the neatest bridge.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I would largely agree with that. The other thing I will point out is that like Zoetti has less, like, in addition to having like less skill pass, it also has like less inherent variability because its mechanics function to kind of narrow down what you can do, right? Like you're using standard playing cards, you're looking to assemble hands, and you're looking to do that in a variety of ways. Whereas like in Astrea, you have a pool of dice, and those dice can come up as one of any of the 6 of their sides, right? So like, whereas like Zoetti's kind of about like pushing the design space toward, like pushing your fight space towards like a smaller set of things. Astrea kind of like branches out faster, if that makes sense. Is what I'm saying making any sense at all?
Like, yeah, I guess I do think I agree with that. And Astrea also has some interesting stuff because the dice themselves sort of have this reactivity towards one another, right? Which is to say that like in something like Magic, you have the opportunity for lethal puzzles, right? Because the order of operations that things play out is actually pretty crucial, right? With Astrea, you have a similar sort of reactivity where your dice are synergizing with one another in a really kind of high way. Whereas with Zoetti, I feel like your hands, your cards are less synergistic, and it is more about kind of assembling kind of power turns in a way. It is about like loading yourself up to put yourself in a place to have just like a really explosive kind of pop off moment.
Yeah, no, and yeah, there's a little bit more hand formation too, because you know, you can keep some of like you can keep some of your cards in somebody, right?
Yeah, so you keep some of your cards, and you can also see some of the cards that you're going to draw. So you're doing this thing of how do I kind of maximize? Really, what I'm describing is like Zoetti, I feel like it's about maximizing turn over turn, right? Astrea, I feel like every turn is kind of a blank slate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Every turn is kind of its own lethal puzzle that you're figuring out, and you're trying to get as close to lethal as possible. Whereas Zoetti, I'm thinking a lot about the future, right? And how I'm approaching future turns, basically. Which I think is neat.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that largely. Yeah. So do we want to do like a basic rundown for people who haven't played?
Yeah, sure. We can talk about some of the mechanics. So the idea is that Astrea, from A to Z. Okay. The idea is that Astrea is a deck builder, is a roguelike deck builder, but you're not building a deck of cards, you're building a deck of dice, right? Each die has 6 faces. When you draw a die, you roll it, and that face, you know, whatever face you roll is the opportunity that you have inside of that turn. It's what you can do in your turn, basically. There are 5 types of dice, right? So there are starter dice, which are the weakest and simplest of dice. There are safe dice that have no bad faces. There are balanced dice that have mostly good faces, like 3 or like 4 kind of good faces, 3 good faces, 3 bad faces kind of thing. And then risky dice, which pretty much universally have 2 really good faces and 4 really bad faces, right? But there's this dynamic where safe dice are weak and risky dice are powerful. So for instance, you might have purify 1 or 2, which is kind of like damage, right? In your on a safe die, but you might have purify 12 on a risky die. And there's this kind of like interconnectivity between like, I don't even know how to it's so complicated to describe this, I guess. It's this thing of like You need power, because if you take only safe dice, you typically will lose. You will not have enough power to win the game, right? You need to take some risky dice in order to have real oomph in your deck, right? You have to have real kind of like value. It's kind of like if you made a Magic the Gathering deck out of all 1-drops. That's sort of what making a deck out of all safe dice does, right? But if you take too many risky dice, then what happens is you just keep rolling really bad faces, and you get underwater when it comes to the negative kind of counter effects, right? And you end up in a place where you're just in a losing position, and there's nothing you can do to get out of it and to win.
Yeah, you failed to mention the fifth type, which is epic dice, which are like
Right.
all pretty good faces. Like something I noticed is that the epic dice faces tend not to be as good as like the risky dice faces, but there are no bad faces on them. Say like starter dice, like you say, call starter dice weak, but they're actually, I think they're kind of like between like a safe die and a balanced die, because they all have like one bad face and like some moderate power in them. Like
Really, I think I would say I would say every starter die is worse than a safe die. I think I would rather have safe dice than starter dice.
that might depend specifically.
I wonder if
The neutral starter dice might be worse.
I'm honestly just gonna load up the game. I think there is maybe I'm vaguely remembering that there are strictly better safe dice than starter dice of the same type. So I'm thinking with like Solarius, he has Shark Strike, right? Does a little bit of corruption to you, does a little bit of damage. I'm pretty sure Shark Strike, that is like safe Shark Strike, does
see, this is what I
more.
was thinking. I don't think there's a, or at least I don't recall seeing a safe Shark Strike die. Just because.
Okay. So the safe die, or I'm sorry, the starter die is Shark Blow. It scales from 2 to 5 purify to an enemy, with 1 to 3 corrupt yourself. And then Shark Strike, the safe Shark Strike, is 3 to 5 purify to an enemy, and 1 to 2 corrupt yourself. So that one at least is pretty strictly better than its
That
like
makes sense.
safe counterpart. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Huh, I hadn't picked up on that then. Yeah.
But I do see I do see a little bit of what you mean when it comes to sort of safe dice and starter dice, because one of the things about starter dice is that a lot of the starter dice are like 2 purify, 2 shield, which is actually like pretty insane, right? Getting that's a 4, that prevents 4 damage essentially, or it deals 2, prevents 2. Like you have a lot of options when it comes to that kind of thing, and that's really useful. I guess we're also talking about, I want to explain, I guess, like
The core
the
mechanic.
dual damage system. Yeah, so there's 2 types of, you can do really essentially 2 things. You can purify and you can corrupt. Purification heals you and deals damage to your enemies. Your enemies are pretty universally in the lore of the game these corrupted figures who need to be purified. Corruption damages you and heals your opponents, right? It also increases something called their overcorruption meter. We can talk about that, which just is like an extra action that they can trigger when they get too much, when they suck up too much kind of corruption, right? There's obviously a gazillion more mechanics than that. The number of keywords in this game is truly staggering. But yeah.
And the only other thing I wanted to say about, you mentioned that risky dice are like 2 and 4. That's typically the case, but there are, I think, both risky and balanced dice where like the face itself has a dual nature to it, and like it has a good thing and a drawback on it, and sometimes the like the shark cleave, I forget what the title is, but like the shark strike, that the cleave one is a risky die. It's like 4 to all enemies, 4 purified to all enemies, and like 5 or 6 to, it's like 4 to 6 purified to all enemies, 5 to 7-ish corruption to you. So that is also a flavor of risky die, which is just like,
yeah. And then one last thing is your health is represented by like these kind of like pips of corruption, where you start fully purified, but as you corrupt yourself, you lose the piece of these. You essentially have 6 health, right? But as you take that corruption damage, you unlock what are called virtues, which are extra actions. So if I take damage, I can pop up a virtue and then use it for a particular, to some particular end.
Well, you have 7 corruption, right? Because you can take 6, and then you take 1 more, and it kills the heart.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, true. Yeah, you can take all the way to 6, but if you lose one, then you lose a health, right? That's like being at 1 HP. So yeah.
Yeah. Although technically, let me think. Yeah, it is 7 because so you also have 3 hearts, with some exceptions, and so when you empty your purification meter or corruption meter is what it's called, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
When you empty when your corruption meter is emptied of purity, you will lose a heart, and if you're on your if you don't have any hearts left, you die and you lose. You become corrupted and you lose the run. But yeah, that's all of the basic mechanics. Lou in the chat says the truest good face of Astrea is Mooney. What a cutie. You are wrong. Solarius is the best. I will brook no other argument. Shark Boy.
Man, do I know? So do I think Havelius is my favorite character. It's complicated.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Havelius is good. Or actually, so let's say, who is your favorite character to play as?
It's complicated. There are some builds that I just think are so incredibly fun. I love hex builds. Moonlight on Mooney is just like maybe one of the most fun builds to ever do. I don't know. Anchor. Have you done the Anchor? Maybe it's called Anchor Judgment, Anchor Purification, or something like that. It's the one that scales. So every time you kill an enemy with this, it gets 3 more purification. So it deals 3, and then it deals 6, and then it deals 9. Have you ever done that one?
No, because I unlocked it on my last run.
Okay, yeah. So that build on Solarius is insanely fun. Vendetta on Solarius is super fun. Have you ever done the Vendetta build?
Vendetta is how I finished my last. It was just like
Yeah.
constant hurting myself and building it up is so good. Yeah.
There are just and that's kind of true of everybody. Like there are so many builds that I like for so many characters that are just really fun to play.
That's fair.
I think maybe my favorite character to play, if I aggregate all of the builds, is probably Havelius, because Havelius has the recycle build, which is super fun. He has, me and the boys, which is the build where you just buff your sentinels and they're just like absolute Giga Chad monsters, right? You have charged body, which I have always loved the charged body version of playing Havelius, where you're just like stacking light shield and then using like shield blow to deal damage equal to your light shield, all of that kind of stuff. I just feel like Havelius probably has the maximum number. You have a Vorpal plate, which is insanely cool, but also just like so deeply fucked up and risky and hard to pull off. All of those are just like so fun, and I love playing all of those versions of Havelius. And I don't know that there's any other character who I'm like, every single build that I can play on you is fun, even if like I probably have more fun playing. God, I played a version of Solarius on the launch stream that was super fun. It was, you start with Empower 3, but you only have 1 heart. And so it was just like a deep Empower Reef Song like build. Like that was just like insanely crazy. I probably like Moonlight more. I've done this. My favorite Astra build is the chaos dice, where you get the chaos dice to be epic dice and you're just like constantly rolling epic dice or whatever. Like all that stuff I think is just like insane.
Yeah, I was gonna say Astra's probably my least favorite, just because like the chaos dice are the ones that are that have a chance to do purify, a chance to do corruption. That is so different than all the other mechanics, which like you always know what it's gonna do. That it is not my favorite to do, but it's still it's not like
yeah. So technically the one that's 50-50 is Confuse, right? Where it could be yeah. But the thing that I'm talking about is every time you draw a chaos die, it has 25% chance of being an epic die.
Right. Okay.
But you can get favorable winds, which is like a buff. You get a ton of this buff, and if you max out on favorable wins, every time you draw a chaos die, you get an epic die. And there's a couple of things that kind of like support this build, but that is probably my favorite. That's probably my favorite build of Astra. Maybe Astra is my least favorite as well. I think Sothis is probably my least favorite. Really, I like chanting, and I've had a good time with chanting. But really, my favorite Sothis build is just like the nuke, the affliction nuke build. Do you know this? Where like there's a couple of things that key off of affliction that you have.
Oh yeah. I ran that on him. Yes, I like that build as
Yeah.
well.
You know, I'm actually also sort of lying. There's another build on Astra that I really love, which is Sky Piercer, which is it's a buff you give yourself, and when you use Meteor Rain, you just like blast everyone with purification. And Meteor Rain is like the corrupt version of Thunderstorm, right? It
Right,
deals
yeah.
one corruption a number of different times. But Sky Piercer says every time you use Meteor Rain, each hit of Meteor Rain hits your enemies for a certain amount, and so you just stack up a bunch of Sky Piercer and then you just Meteor Rain, and it does like a gazillion damage. Like that's like super fun. A lot of what I think are like really fun builds in Astrea are these like builder spender kind of things, right? Where it is about you know, building up a certain kind of buff or a certain synergy, and then you know by turn 3 or 4 you're in like a really powerful place and you're just like going insane.
Yeah, no, I definitely like this hilarious build that I played with Vendetta was like I like it duplicated the risky die that like does like this is infected by power times the number on the die dice. So like I had like 3 or 4 of the risky version of that in the deck, and so it's like end of turn 1. This 4 shark does 64 damage. It's just like so much fun.
Oh my god, that is actually insane. But that is super risky because with Vendetta, every time it increases the amount of corruption you take.
Well, so yeah, it's only one Vendetta, right? It's one Vendetta from the relic, but
right,
the shark,
and then
but it stacks.
So when the shark thing, okay, yeah, so the shark thing doesn't stack with the torment effect.
What
am I misunderstanding what you're talking about? There's one. He has one die that is deal 4 corruption, you know, like or something like that, right? Like deal 1 corruption 4 times, not affected by doom, right? Is this what you're talking about?
No. I'm talking about so basically my build for this was effectively some shark strike dice, and then there is a die that has like a picture of a shark on it with a number, like the nose of the shark, and the way it works is it does like
it does extra per. Yeah, Eridanian Wrath is the name of that.
Oh,
the
yeah,
name of
yeah.
that die.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know exactly, and it has the visual effect of the shark coming up and biting.
Yeah. So it's like 4 like, but like when I was fighting like some of the bosses, like I mirrored Solarius in my post in the
in Spoilerland, I guess.
Yeah, in Spoilerland, but like. Mirror Solarius gives you like a 3 corruption debuff. And so I would literally, and like I just had like so much nonsense where like I had like Rising Star and I had like another thing that gave me an extra Purify. And so I would like, and if I didn't have, I picked up a ring that did like extra Purify to them, but less Purify to me. If I didn't have that, I'd be able to infinite chain this, I think. But I would like use 3 corruption to myself, and then the 2 Purify to myself to heal it back, or no, I would do the Purify first, and then I'd do the Corruption, which would reset both of them, and so I could like stack like Empowers on myself like a ton. It was so much fun. Like I think I took down the final thing in like 2 or 3 turns. I got like play 20 virtues in a turn achievement.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is super cool. Yeah, and then I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think it might be my favorite build to do that Vendetta build. It's just like so fun. It's also very risky. Is the part that because you're also hidden from the enemy, like you can't see their shit. Because we're both talking about the Black Hole Blessing where you get Vendetta 1 just instantly, right?
Yeah.
And you can just like build your whole character around that.
And so
I don't know.
The thing I like about going hidden is you just like stack hidden, right? Like I got like the extra draw that applies more hidden, and I got the false idol. It's like, why the fuck do I care? Right? Like,
oh my god, yeah, false prophecy. Holy shit. Yeah, and did you actually get the falling star?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my god.
And I got the falling star before a normal fight. I have made the mistake of picking up the falling star before a boss fight, and that's rough.
Wow. Yeah, so the falling star, these are events, right? Yeah. Those are I'm pretty sure these are the most rare events. Falling star is a rare event, and then the other one is a rare event. The the false prophecy where they get
Yeah.
infinity hidden. That's also a rare event. So you know what? Good on you, bud. Way to way to way to roll it. I also got Falling Star on my crazy Empower run where I just started with Empower 3 or whatever. Um and I remember I was in there and I was in the Twitch chat and the chat was just like, take it, you have to do it, buddy. And I was like, okay, but and I won, which was good. I mean, one of my things is I always go for the like the risk. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And I think part of that is maybe just like a me thing. I've talked with other players, and you can tell me if you're different than this. I take every opportunity for power because to me, I would rather sort of flame out on a hard fight than feel impotent on like the final boss. Does that make sense? Um,
Absolutely. I don't think I've ever chosen the normal fight when you have the chance between the normal fight and the hard fight.
I do, you know, it's funny. I do think it's right. You know, when you get up there in difficulty and like anomaly or whatever, I think it's correct to do that. But I fucking never do. I never want to. I just fucking, and so, uh, yeah. And so there's a lot of times where I will just go for these really deep, really powerful sorts of builds where I'm trying to make the most I'm trying to make like the strongest possible thing. So really like the hardest fight for me tends to be like the hard fight on the second map, right? Because this is typically before my build has gotten running. Um but after but like you know I'm still opting into a like a really difficult fight. Like there's the fight that's like the three corrupted Moonies. Do you know this one? One of
Yeah.
them stuns, one of them silences, one of them paralyzes or whatever. That is, I think, my run killer. That's the I very rarely die to a boss. I very rarely die in the back half because by then I'm typically set up. I have my build and I'm just cruising, right? When I get into sort of like the back part of the game. Really what tends to kill me is I take all these black hole blessings and you know these really hard fights or whatever before I'm kind of up and running. And if I roll into that fight, it's just like GG sometimes.
So the run killers for me are the guy with the lance and the boss. So the guy with the lance that like gains doom if you reroll,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
the boss that gains doom if you use virtues.
Oh my
Um,
god. Yep.
just because like
The
it's one of those things where like I do a lot of like, oh, I will mitigate the risk on my dice by being able to re-roll them and like spend virtues around them, right? Like, you know, like, but that's hilarious when it's like I spend my virtues to like get my health back up after I've damaged myself. It's like, oh, but I'm powering up someone with the thing.
Yeah, I also think those are both very dangerous because Solarius is the worst about Doom. I think Doom on Solarius is so catastrophically bad. Doom on other characters can sometimes be kind of nothing. Like Mooney has a Doom build where you just stack a bunch of Doom and you use it to convert and then you just like blast for a gazillion, right? Um, but Solarius has this thing that is tough to work around where you know, like any of the if you pick up two Doom in a fight, all of those Shark Strike, like basic Shark Strikes, are catastrophically bad to take. Because like now it's not you're doing it's not, oh, I'm taking, you know, I'm taking 2 to deal 5. Now it's I'm taking 5 to deal 5. And it's like that's like a really bad proposition. It is way worse to be kind of like taking that in on yourself. But then there are other characters who I take Doom on no sweat because it's like it never matters, right? Sothis, you know, like if I'm going this affliction build on Sothis, or like chanting on Sothis, I'm very rarely I like even he doesn't even really get too many corrupt faces, so the Doom basically never matters, right? It'll be like once or twice over the course of the entire run that I roll a pretty bad corrupt face, and it's like, okay, well, I have to take 6 now. You know, that's something I can like pretty easily do.
Yep. No, I feel that. The other one that sometimes kills me, and I think this might be in the third run, is the shark guy that is just like you have to just like wait for, you know, last 4 turns.
Oh, but yeah, but you have to blast him for, you know, however much,
Yeah.
because every time he starts with like 30 Doom, 26 on the base level, right? And every time he takes purification, that Doom decreases, but it resets at the beginning of the turn, right? He has infinite health, right? Yeah, I absolutely get that. He takes a heart from me a lot of the times. Generally speaking, I can get their turn 2, right? But it is the setup turn of turn 1 where there are times it's just like I don't have 26, like
Yeah.
my
I remember.
build is built around putting a bunch of hex dice in my pool, putting on a bunch of moonlight, and then turning every hex die into an area for purification, and that takes like 2 or 3 turns to set up, kind of thing. And yeah, if you can't do 26 doom in one, oof, woof. Though
Yeah.
it's funny, I do remember in the launch stream I was playing Astrea against that guy, and I didn't have the ability to I just couldn't do it on turn 1, and then I dodged it. I dodged the corruption. Just dodge. I kept saying that over the course of this stream, where it was just like people were asking for like advice. People were kind of playing along or whatever. My advice was always just roll good. Like that's the way to beat Astrea, right? But yeah, it's like stuff like that. You just can't work around it.
Here's a weird question for you. This is very specific and in the weeds.
Sure.
Solarius used to have a relic that would trigger wave if their health equaled wave, and I haven't found it yet.
Have you maxed them out?
No,
it might unlock later in his.
I would say
yeah.
like they might have like put it down the line because it was like that was like my jam was like because it's also like I love the wave build, but wave is also like wave is hard to do because like it's like I think a less good build without that because any single enemy fight wave is kind of useless. Like it has very limited.
I think so I also like the wave build, but the wave build I think only opens up when you unlock titles stream or whatever, the forceful stream thing, which is the thing where it hits you for 2 at the end of the turn and you deal a certain amount of purification, but you also trigger it deals damage equal to their wave or whatever. That is the only way that I think you can translate the wave build on like in the first like 2 or 3 levels of Solarius. It is tough to get there. The other one that I've done that I do enjoy is the one where when something dies with wave on it, its wave transfers to the next target. That one can also sort of make things work, but yeah.
It doesn't really work for single, but for like single enemies.
Yeah, that's true.
The thing that is most disappointing to me about that one, because I love that one too, is that like it doesn't chain within a turn, right? Like it's not like if you trigger it and it jumps and then like the wave would kill that one, it doesn't also jump to like the next guy, which like no, but I set up this big domino pile. I wanted to go, please. But yes, I agree.
Yeah, I do understand the sort of there's some stuff like that doesn't work in the way that it might in kind of like other games. Like one of the things that's interesting Astrea is that damage and healing happen simultaneously and they cancel each other out, right? One thing that you would sort of expect from a game like this is one triggers first and then the other. Like if we were playing Magic, right? Let's say we're playing Magic the Gathering and I have a spell effect, right, that says deal 100 damage, but then I have another spell effect that says gain 100 life, right? As soon as the deal 100 damage one goes off, I die, right? But Astrea, because it's a computer, right? You can resolve these things essentially simultaneously. So if I have corruption and relief, or I'm sorry, affliction and relief, where one of those is deal a certain amount of purification at the end of the turn, the other is deal a certain amount of corruption at the end of the turn. I can have 35 affliction, but as long as I have 35 relief, I'm fine, right?
Yeah, no, I mean it's also like I think those two actually happen simultaneously. But we were talking about wave. Remember you said that you didn't know it worked this way until I did it at PAX. Is if you would die, but then the thing if say a shark strike would kill you, but the shark strike kills the thing, you will like stand in like the like hurt animation, and then the wave will come across and cancel it out, right? Like you could actually you can see it happening in sequence, whereas like the one you were talking about doesn't even like blip the thing, or if it does, I haven't seen it.
It doesn't even trigger your virtues, right? It's not even like you go down to 0 and then heal back up. Yeah. That would imply you trigger your virtues. It's just it cancels each other out, which I think is fair enough or whatever. There's also some stuff like fun stuff that happens with that. Maybe my most fun build I think I have ever played on Sothis was one where I was hitting everybody with area of effect affliction and everybody with area of effect relief, and that was
I did that
basically
as
all
well.
I was doing because I had two star blessings. One that said when you take purification above your max health, you hit enemies equal to half of that, right? And another one said when you deal corruption to yourself, you deal that much purification to your enemies. So I just like stacked the shit out of affliction on myself. I take 35 affliction and just blast 35 damage kind of thing. And I think that's
Yeah.
pretty fun.
No, I think that's what this game is built for, right? Is like that kind of
Yep.
thing, right? Like I was commenting to you before the cast started that when I was testing, it took me a handful of runs to like get through each character. On
Mhm.
release, because there was an update that deleted everything. I got through each Oracle one and done to get them to the end.
Is it because you already knew what builds to kind of like go for? Like you understood, oh, I'm on turn, like I'm on my first choice, right? And oh, I can this is a good die for this thing, and I'm gonna go for this thing.
I think that's part of it. I think there's just like a level of like system mastery, right?
Mhm.
Like knowing when to like where to apply things. Where it's like, well, I need to like I can afford to throw the like I almost never throw corruption on the enemy, unless I have one of the relics that like does like purification to them when you corrupt an enemy. It's like, well, I can fit this on me, and then like it and or like I can throw it on the on like one of my sentinels and like heal a sentinel back up. Also little things like I don't know if you remember, but at one point I asked you, it's like, why is this killing me so hard? It's like, oh, because it's like this one particular encounter where the main enemy has an effect that doubles all purification and corruption, and then his sentinel has two thorns on it. So like you hit it and it does 4 corruption to you, which is fucking like nightmarish, right? But I know to look out for that, right? Like,
Yeah.
the only the only time that still kills me is if I'm playing fucking Astrea, and it's like lightning storm is like, oh, I kill like,
Yeah, well, that's funny. It's funny because Astra and the other one is Orion have really tough interactions with thorns because a lot of the damage they do are these kind of like plinky, like one or two hit,
Yeah,
pieces of damage kind
and
of thing.
they're random.
Astra, yeah, Astra's random thing, and her thunderstorm, right, where it's like
Yeah,
deal one purification 6 times or something like that. Like that can just like murder you on that fight.
yeah, um, yeah. No, like those are always the things that they feel properly roguelite, so I'm not too mad about it. But it's like
Mhm.
it's like, oh, I'm playing Orion and I hit this button. And oops, I hit the proc 4 random orbs, and they were all karma, and I was at 2 karma.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked a lot about Orion. Orion was the secret character, right, who we did not reveal, kind of before release, even a little bit at all. Orion was pretty interesting, and still to this day, I have also just one shot basically every, it's pretty hard for me to like drop a run in like the early sort of anomalies. It takes me to like anomaly 5 or 6 or 7 in order to start like losing a lot. Like in a proper kind of roguelike faction. Um and Orion makes me lose a lot. I lose a lot on Orion, just because like he's just too 5D chess for me sometimes. My favorite build of Orion is one that is like you get a certain amount of Astrarium when you hit Cosmic Orb or whatever, and just rotate. You just rotate. You spin the orbs. You spin to win, right? You eventually get a certain amount of that where it's just like you're just triggering Astrarium every time you pass that you pass around the orb, so you're just getting like revolution 7 or oscillate is my favorite of these, right? Because you oscillate, you go back and forth between two like two orbs or whatever, and it's just like that stuff is so insanely fun. I could play that build of Orion all day long. But just like it's interesting because Orion has a lot of builds that I find very tough to put together. He has a whole light shield build that I've tried a couple of times and I've just like never gotten that thing to work. But it is what it is.
Yeah, no, Orion's tough because like he has it feels like he has at least one build for each orb, but like you can't reliably be on a particular orb, right? Like that's like his whole design. So anything that relies too heavily on one orb just feels like like I never take like a cosmic dust or whatever, the one that's like the cosmic orb will hit everybody if activated, because it's like, one, I can't reliably get to Cosmic necessarily, and two, like, this is the thing I was talking about with Wave, is like there's not reliably more than one enemy on the field, so like, and like I find not that I find healing underpowered, it's just I don't find it as useful, because like, you have a lower cap than your enemies do, and you can put out so much purify sometimes, but
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, yeah, I've still been having a great time with this game. It is so much fun. Kudos to little Leo and you guys for putting out a banger of a game.
Yeah, I do want to say it's funny because I want to tell like development stories. The game used to be so much harder. Basically the base version of the game was like Anomaly 7 or something like that. And everybody kept losing runs. And I eventually got to this point where I told Leo, I said, players probably just like design wise, players expect in a roguelike to win like 50% of their runs at the lowest difficulty level, right? Probably more, right? Most players probably expect maybe like 70% win rate. And I was losing, I was maybe like 5 or 10% win rate, right? And part of that was, obviously like system mastery or stuff like that. But when we were giving this sort of feedback, I basically told them, I was like, most games we recommend, like when they're doing difficulties, most games typically start at around like a normal level. And get harder. This game, I think you've got the hard mode, right? You wanna scale down, right? And then you eventually scaled in both directions. I have yet to complete Anomaly, which is essentially Anomaly 20, right? Ascension sort of 20 would be what we would call it. With Astrea, there are 13 levels of Anomalies, 7 levels, I think, for the final encounter, and 13 for the pre-final encounter. And I have gotten, I think, to Anomaly 8, and I think I got that on Mooney. There was a while where I was just jamming Mooney games because I was like, let me just do this on, I consider Mooney to be the easiest character. I was just like, let me just do this on like the easiest fucking character and I can get this done. But yeah, it's a real toughie sometimes.
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't know if I'd agree with you that most people expect to win 70% of their roguelites on the lowest. I feel like, and maybe this is like just because like there's not a lot of game like broad roguelikes with sliding difficulty, but I feel like people expect to like lose like essentially. I think the kind of like the modal roguelite is like you play for like 2 hours and in that you will have like one good run that you will get most of the way and maybe fail out of, and then you'll be like, okay, I'm done for the night, type of deal. Like that's how like I played Gungeon. That's how like I feel like NetHack got played, right? Like Dungeons of Dreadmore. A lot of those games, especially the games without like Astrea doesn't have like building power. Like Rogue Legacy has building power, which you kind of expect to lose until you win, just because you're building up power over the course of the run, or over the course of the game rather. But I don't know if I agree with you that people expect to win like they're like. I feel like it was a handful of runs before I beat my Slay the Spire for the first time. That's an interesting thought. Like I feel like I would have expected to like take a couple of attempts to hit the end of the first run, a handful more to get to the end of the second one, and then maybe it like eventually hit that third one. I guess these kind of like deck builder ones do work a little differently though, because just thinking out loud about it, Slay the Spire, you do eventually start building up difficulty on those as well. So
yeah, that was a lot of what I was thinking, right? Which was just like, how frequently are you getting to the final boss and winning, for like a fresh new player? And that's why I came up with that number of like 50%, because I was like,
yeah,
I was talking to people who were never winning runs, right? In the old version of the game, who were like these fresh players. And I was kind of just like, I think it is a win rate. I think it's just like a win rate issue, right? Where the game is a little too tough and it just needs to be brought down. I don't know that I think it's interesting. I maybe do agree with you that I don't think anybody expects in a roguelike to win their first run. And win rate is kind of bad for simulating this in a way, because it sort of expects that you'll it expects that you're gonna just like you have a 50% chance of winning your first run. I think people have a pretty good chance of winning their second run, right? I think most people they'll do one run on Mooney and fail out, and then do a second run on Mooney and maybe get there. Do you know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm describing a little bit when I'm describing 50%. Or the 2 hour example, I think I would probably say maybe that represents 4 runs and you win 2, lose 2 kind of thing. And
Yeah.
maybe it's you lose twice on Mooney, but then you win on Mooney and you win on Solarius, like that kind of or something kind of along those. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think the
Yeah,
rules
yeah.
are also different for these deck builder style roguelites because like I think the real answer is like every like 50% of runs are winnable is not quite right, but like winnable by a competent like builder, right? Like the thing about say Enter the Gungeon is like from moment one, the run is winnable, but it's a player skill issue, right? Like and the classic roguelikes have a heavy luck component, so that even works out a little bit differently there.
Yeah, I mean there are definitely some things I would probably say that are like traps in early game, especially for like Mooney and Solarius, right? Like this wave build stuff. I think a competent player is the kind of player who might, like you or me, if I was starting fresh, I would know, oh, Mooney doesn't unlock Moonlight until level 2, so I can't do the Hex Dice build. Do you know what I mean? I can't go for that. And a competent player can probably 100% win a first game every time, right? But I think a fresh player who doesn't have any mastery of like the individual, they just don't see enough dice. They don't understand how stuff is going to like work out or whatever. Like I think my first win on Mooney, I was winning with a conversion, like Twilight Sigil. You're putting Twilight Sigil on guys, you're converting a bunch or whatever. That was probably how I won. I honestly don't really remember how I beat on the stream the other day, but I did one shot Mooney, Solarius, maybe Hevelius. I think I died on Astra and I had to go twice on Astra. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I think a big part of it is something that you said a lot, which is like a lot of times, the correct choice is to not take a die, which I think is not a thing that you have to learn. Lou in the chat says you died on Shimbo. I don't know.
Did I die on Shimbo? Oh, you know what? You're right. I think I went for a wave build and I died. Right. And I wouldn't have had forceful stream. I would have been level 1. I wouldn't have had forceful stream. I wouldn't have had the thing that the wave triggers in the battle or whatever. So yeah, I think you're right. I think I did die on Shimbo.
Name is hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. You were just saying a thing.
Oh, about not taking dice.
Oh yeah, that is definitely one of my things. Is that it is almost always to take a die. I used to take tons of dice. I used to think because this was kind of my like Hearthstone brain maybe thinking. Because in Hearthstone you don't reshuffle the deck. You know what I mean? So getting a bigger deck just gives you kind of value and longevity. And at a certain point, like you don't even have the option when I was doing like the Hearthstone roguelike modes, like the Hearthstone adventures, to you don't even have the option to pick that stuff up, right? But in Astrea, as soon as you exhaust your dice pool, you just reshuffle it back again, and you can do it all over again, right? And that makes for a really interesting sort of dynamic because what it means is you have essentially infinite draws. You will never run out of dice, right? There's no punishment for reshuffling, right? Which means any die that you take that is not synergistic to your build dilutes your build, right? And you will end up, picking up dice that are not super worth it. There is that one star blessing, which I have never gotten to work correctly, where like if you have 30 or more dice, you just start doing more purification or whatever. I have never my instincts are just such that like I've never been able to make that work, but I theoretically kind of want to try it out one day, just like take everything and see what happens. I took it once because I thought it would trigger with Hex Dice, I thought it was dynamic, which is to say that when I was shuffling a bunch of hex dice um into my dice pool, I would be blasting for way more, but it's not. It just triggers on turn 1, basically.
That makes sense. Yeah. No. Yeah. I have had successful runs with lots of dice, but like I think you're mostly right. Right. Like you need like if you're not taking a synergistic die, it's bad. And for that reason, I rarely ever take neutral dice. Just because like in my last hilarious run, I took a couple of like neutral shield dice just because it's like that's not like if I get like a doom or two, I'm going to do more than my health bar, and so I need to be able to like absorb that with shield. But other than that, like I typically don't.
Wait, I'm sorry. When you mean neutral, do you mean balanced?
No, I mean like non-character specific.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Do I take neutral dice ever? I don't know. I mean, there's some stuff where I take it's just the best that you can, right? Like an epic dice.
Oh
It's
yeah,
pretty common that I get epic dice that I'm just like, whatever. Like fresh die. I'm not super into virtues, but I'll just make it happen. That kind of a thing. Yeah, I guess I do sort of agree with you. I don't know, there's some neutral stuff that I'll pick up. Like with Mooney, there's a neutral die called Excruciatus, which is just like a ton of corruption, but it puts a serenity on a target. I'll take that on like a Mooney conversion build. It's like if there are neutral dice that overlap well, right? If I'm doing charged body on Hevelius, which is all about light shield, obviously I'll take a light shield die, right?
right.
But yeah, you really have to synergize in order for me to want to pick it. In order for me to want to pick it up.
Yeah. Yeah. What else do you want to talk about this game?
I don't know. I mean, we've hit a lot of the six, I guess.
It's a good game.
Yeah. What about you obviously hit the Orion cutscene this time? Did you enjoy the story?
It's a story. No, I mean like I get what they're going for, but it also has that kind of like what programmer art is?
Like ASCII art?
No, like programmer art is like when like your game has like not great art because a programmer did it as like a placeholder.
Oh, okay.
Like some programmer who doesn't have any art skills like drew something by hand, and it's okay, because like it's like a thing they do on the side, but it's like not a final.
This has programmer story.
Yeah, I feel a little bit bad about that because I think some of that might be like, I assume English is not Leo's first language. Some of like, it's not the story beats. It's kind of like the dialogue, which I assume is not helped by English not being the first language, but like the whole like I feel like I was like missing an important piece of like cultural context for like the little brother joke that like went on for like like 7 lines in that scene, or maybe it's just kind of like like it felt a little stilted, but it was still fun, right? Like I don't come to the game for like I didn't come to this game because I cared about. I will say as much as I thought like the story wasn't super great. One, it was less Englishy than Zoetti. No offense.
True.
And two, I liked the unspoken implied stuff, right? Like we don't actually get a lot of information about these 6 planets, right? Like we just they're different animal people, and like Sothis is like a prince that like got like expelled from his homeland, that kind of stuff. Like that kind of like John Wickian, Dark Soulsian kind of like not a lot said but a lot implied, I think is very cool.
I am also a huge fan of that. One of my favorite things actually is that if you think about the enemies that you're fighting, a lot of the time they match up pretty 1-to-1 with the like not quite, there are obviously much truer dark reflections of the individual oracles, but it is things like the big shark guy with the hammer where he has like the doom or whatever that feels like in a sort of like narrative design way that feels like I am fighting a corrupted Eridanian, right? Like you understand why him and Solarius come from the same planet, right? You know, the owls that I talked about, these run killing owls, it makes a lot of sense to me that they come from Mooney's planet, right? Because they're doing the same sort of like scholar wizard stuff. I also think that the kind of character classes come across incredibly well, and there's a lot of like neat little details that make that stuff work. In kind of the same way that I talk about it with WoW, right? Like something I've talked about with WoW before is that there's sort of an inherent narrative design to each of the classes, where it's like the class fantasy of, you know, playing an arms warrior versus playing a fury warrior is different, you know, because the gameplay mechanics are built to be evocative of these sorts of, you know, kind of colorful, flavorful, loreful, Orthos sort of aesthetics. And I think that also comes across, right? The idea that Sothis, you know, he's an exiled prince, but he kind of has this like, Sothis is sort of a rogue, like Mooney is kind of a cleric maybe, or like a wizard or something, right? Solarius is a berserker, he's a barbarian, right? You know, like all of that stuff comes across in the design of their characters, which I think works pretty great, and
Yeah,
I
I
appreciate that
think
a
the
lot.
art design is also phenomenal, top notch.
Yeah, I think that makes a huge difference. Because there's a lot of little stuff in the art that's happening that I don't know, it just like sells it, I guess.
I agree. I agree. Well, with that, do we want to move on to our weeks besides
Yeah,
Astrea?
sure. I mean, yeah, my week I was deeply, deeply Astrea pilled. But tell me what you've been up to.
Been playing Street Fighter. I have bounced in and out of platinum into gold like half dozen times today. So you know, fighting the good fight, learning the battle there. I probably should stop playing today. I feel like I was on tilt for most of it. uh, Something I did want to. I finished the. I don't know. Remember if I talked about this last week, but I've been listening to the Terry Pratchett Discworld books. I finished Color of Magic and the Light Fantastic, the first two books. Very funny, very good. I watched Cyberpunk Edgerunners in preparation for Phantom Liberty dropping. Not that it's tied
Oh my
into
god, are we gonna be Phantom Liberty gamers? Shit.
you know, I still want to finish Baldur's Gate 3 before I jump into that. So, um, Edgerunners is pretty good. It is a trigger anime. It feels to me very much like I heard somebody say that, like, you know, Trigger is like has been trying to make the same anime for like 20 years or whatever, and they do, like, you know, they're variously successful at it. This Edgerunners feels very much like Tengu Top and Gurren Lagann to me, in all the ways I liked it and didn't like that anime. Um, Up to and including, I am sure someone out there will be in like. So, have you ever seen Gurren Lagann? Gurren Lagann? Have you seen it?
I haven't actually not seen Gurren Lagann, but I do know quite a lot about it, obviously. Like I'm the drill that pierces the heavens, all that stuff. So
Do you know the name of the main character?
no, actually.
So, the name of the main character is Simon, but a bunch of weebs say it's Shimon because that's the way they say it in the anime, because it's a bunch of Japanese people saying Simon.
Okay.
Like
All
it's
right.
like in the subtitles it's spelled Simon. So I am wondering if there are people out there that are going to do the same thing for Edgerunners, because like the main character's name is David Martinez, but like, you know, in the original Japanese dubbed English, it's Davido Martinez, right? Like, so you know, but you know, and it's, but it's, you know, it's very cyberpunk. It's pretty good. Great visuals. Great little story inside of it. Definitely like it's one of those things that's like it's very cool, but it's also like I know the game can't play like this, right? Like one of the things that happens in the show is like, you know, like a big thing makes a big hole in the ground. It's like not going to happen in Cyberpunk, right? Like, you know, in the game outside of like a set piece moment, right? Like you can't have that kind of dynamic stuff in a game for the most part, right? Like we're only in very specific types of games. So, um, uh, but still a lot of fun. I'd recommend it if you're a fan of Trigger and or Cyberpunk. Music's great. Visuals are great. Story's pretty okay.
Okay, that's interesting. I had not planned to go back to Cyberpunk, but I might be convinced. Part of this is I got into Starfield and then I fell out of Starfield, I guess, just because of all this Astrea stuff and everything else. And I ended up just kind of I don't know. When I think about going back to Starfield, I'm like, am I really going to do that? Is that really going to happen?
So Starfield, I'm okay with putting off for a little longer because I figure my true Starfield experience will be in 6 months when I go and I set up like a half dozen mods and play for half an hour and then put it down for another 6 months. Like I do with Skyrim.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe, yeah.
But seriously, once the dust kind of settles a little bit around it, and once because the thing that makes the Bethesda team is great is like the huge mod support. So I assume that when that gets there better, I will be a little bit more into it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I played Fallout 3, New Vegas was obviously Obsidian, but I played Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and Skyrim pretty obsessively on release. Even Fallout 4, a game I famously don't like, right? And I think it's pretty bad. I played 100 hours of that before I kind of said that game wasn't great. Starfield, it's just hard to capture my attention with it for some reason. And I did get really into it for like 1 or 2 days, but I just kind of got distracted by like other things, and that's all it took to kind of like knock me out of the mindset where it's like, I guess I'm just not going to go back to Starfield anytime soon. I don't know. We'll see. It's a game I want to love. It's a game I want to love, but I just kind of have it. And I think that that's a pretty common thing. A lot of discourse on Starfield seems to sort of echo that understanding or idea.
How much of that do you think is our lives being busier than they were when Fallout 4 came out?
I think that's probably real. Starfield has come out this is part of what I was stressed the fuck out about when it came to Astrea. I was like, we're launching in like the
year.
There are kaijus all around us, right? Even Baldur's Gate.
I would say there are lesser kaijus too, right? Like Lies of P was like a game that's like very very important to a small subset of people. It's not like Baldur's Gate or Starfield level, but it's there, right?
Yeah, part of my thing, Starfield, I think, has hit softer than I expected. I expected Starfield to be sort of Titanic, and it kind of hasn't. I think a lot of the discourses around Starfield is sort of doing this thing that I've sort of talked about. Phantom Liberty is also real. I mean, we're off a week, obviously, by Phantom Liberty, but they did patch to 2.0 on the same day as Astrea, and I was like, this is the kind of thing that could sink us. You know what I mean? Because it's one of those things, when you're an indie, anything like that can sink you, kind of thing. That's what's happened, and it's happened to other games of ours. Right, Gone Viral, which I think was a pretty good game, and I was pretty proud of that game. We set a release date, we announced it, and then boom, Spelunky and Hades both released right on top of it, and it's just like there's nothing you can do, right?
Say, that's also like the same genre, right? Like it's not like at least with you're not going to Starfield and Astrea for each other's experiences, right? Like,
no, that is absolutely true. There's a version of things where maybe like, I don't know, like we come out on top of like Wild Frost. Wild Frost is kind of what destroyed Zoetti in this way, because they were both these turn-based roguelikes, right? Wild Frost came out a week before Zoetti did.
What is Wild Frost?
This is like Wild Frost is another turn-based. It's another Slay the Spire, basically, kind of game, right? Published by Chucklefish. They're a bigger publisher than we are. They're like not quite Devolver level. They're the Stardew Valley people.
They have a particular aesthetic to them, right? Like
so Wild, a version of things where Astrea comes out right on top of Wild Frost is probably like more dangerous, but we are pretty safe from others of these kinds of like deck builders and stuff like that. And we also had pretty good like ramp up into all this stuff. But yeah, I was worried as fuck just because of how crazy everything is in these. It is like this 3-month stretch of like August to September to October. There's just a million things. Mortal Kombat 1 obviously came out. What else was in August?
Baldur's Gate.
But yeah, Baldur's Gate was the big one in August. Was there something else? I don't know, whatever. But I don't know. People are talking about 2023 is a really insane year of games, and it's probably really true.
Oh, Armored Core. That's the other August game.
Oh yeah. Rubicon. Yep. Yeah. So
yeah, another game that I meant to go back to but haven't. Like I played like the first level of it, and it's like, yeah, it's gotta beat Baldur's Gate, and then I play like, 10 more hours of Street Fighter. I definitely feel that like part of why I'm playing Street Fighter more than I'm playing like finishing up Baldur's Gate is that like Street Fighter is like, when I'm having my morning coffee and it's before I need to log on to work, I will play a couple of matches of Street Fighter. Or if I need a break in the middle of the day and working from home, I will play some Street Fighter. And it's just like, I can play a couple of matches. The only thing I can't do with Street Fighter is I can't play it right before bed because it'll get my blood pressure up and I won't be able to fall asleep.
yeah, boy, I feel you. That's sort of me with Payday right now. Because
Payday 3!
Payday 3 came out famously. They're having these insane server issues or whatever. To be fair, I've been having a pretty great time, but yeah, I think the server issues are rough. We should play Payday 3. Yeah, I think you would. So the thing with Payday 3 is it's on Game Pass. I was actually not planning to play it on launch. I was like, I'll wait, right? Which was true of the original Payday. I only really got into that a couple of years after launch. They had made a bunch of DLC, a bunch of changes to the game or whatever. But when I saw it was on Game Pass, I was like, oh well, this is like sure, yeah, I'll fucking just download it and play it, kind of thing. It's better than I expected. It's actually much better than I expected. To be fair, I haven't been following it too closely. I knew some stuff about it kind of going into launch. Obviously, it's being developed in a bigger, like a bigger engine, and there's some gameplay changes that I was just kind of like vaguely aware of. One of the things that's really nice is they got rid of sort of like the detection meter. Do you remember that? Where like you could be at 0 or you could be at 75.
Vaguely. Is this
Okay.
like the alert level or whatever?
Yeah. Basically, a lot less happens in like you can kind of stealth for any mission now because you have a baseline sort of stealth effect. Even if you're walking in with like full body armor and a shotgun or whatever, you're essentially the same as just like a guy in a suit with a pistol, that kind of thing, right? I think that's been a pretty good change. Basically, every game of Payday I have played so far is we do stealth for a while, and then somebody fucks up, and then it just all goes to shit, and you finish it out, right? Which is different than what we used to do in the first game, because in the first game, or I'm sorry, technically the second game, but the first time we played Payday, you were built so specifically for stealth that you couldn't make that transition work. Right. Whereas now you're kind of always built for loud, so it just doesn't super matter, right? If something goes wrong, that's just we might as well just like rob it normally. That's fine. And I think that's been a pretty good change for the game. The other change to the game
I will
made,
say the most miserable time I ever had playing Payday with you was when we were trying to do that stealth mission. It was like, we'll do it stealth, and we do this a bunch of times. We get a lot of money, and then like we screwed up like 6 times in a row. I'm just like, I don't like this at all. Like, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah. There's also the stealth stuff is also better and more interesting. One of the problems with the original version of stealth was a lot of the time it was like you have your big moment and then you're just sitting around, right? When we did do the stealth drill like the stealth thing appropriately, right? We had this thing where you're just sitting there and waiting for 3 minutes for the drill to go, and there's nothing to do because everybody's down, everybody's on the ground. You've like solved that, right? And you just sit and wait, and like that's really boring. But the stealth version actually tends to be the fastest and most efficient version of doing the mission. And like it's like when the stealth version fails, you pick up the loud version, and it's like they're two different branching paths, right? Like you can either get into the bank stealthy, right, by like doing key card stuff. You find the manager, you tie him up, you take his key card, you go down to the bank, you hit the security room, make sure they can't see, like the security cameras are off, all that kind of stuff. That's all like much more active, right? And there's less like, okay, now you use the same drill stuff. It's like, no, you're not going to stealthily burn into the drill with thermite, right? You are you're gonna do this like key card access kind of like bullshit or whatever. I have never completed a stealth mission on Payday 3 so far, and I'm like level like 25 or something like that. So I don't know, maybe there's more to stealth stuff than I've ever been able to figure out. We've gotten pretty deep a couple of times, but generally speaking, what ends up happening is we kind of progress maybe like 25 to 50% of the mission, and then it fucks up, and then we go loud, and then you just do the mission from there. And yeah, that's
No,
kind
that,
of
that
it.
feels like the way it should be, right? That feels like kind of like a heist movie, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
you follow the plan and then something goes wrong and then like you have to improvise, right? Like that feels like it's about right. Because this is not the stealth mission, but I also have like strong memories of like yelling at Charles Pow to stay on the fucking drill, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is some stuff with that, but that is different because of how like waves and enemies and
Sure.
stuff works, right? So for instance, the thing is now when you're like when you're just robbing the basic bank, for instance, right? You're not using a drill anymore, you're using thermite. And so you make this thermite thing, you're thermiting in from the roof and you're gonna pop into the bottom of the vaults basically. And what the cops keep doing is they pull fire alarms to make sprinklers go off, right?
Oh, okay.
And so the fire alarms will go off, but you can keep the cops from doing that, right? So if you're good, you're managing, you're doing your crowd control, right? You're not letting them get close to the things. um you are able to kind of tamp down on this stuff and make sure it's not, it's not going wrong, it's not nothing bad is happening. The other thing that's neat about that sort of version of gameplay is that the cops scale in intensity, right? So you have one round of basic cops, you have one round of basic cops and some specials, and then you have the third round, which is the most advanced round, and that one's just it's all you got to win, right? Which is not how it used to work. It used to just be you had cops and then break, and then cops and then break, and then cops and then break. But now you have this kind of like ramping threat and intensity that makes it kind of crazier and more fun. Anyway, I don't know, that's Payday 3 so far. Server issues are happening though, and it sucks.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, the other things I wanted to talk about in this back half are so you have thoughts on the Unity pricing thing that got walked back?
Yeah, I think it was dumb as fuck, I guess, is what I would say. But they walked it back, so I'm pretty happy.
Yeah. So
what are your thoughts on the Unity pricing thing?
Yeah, so just to set the stage, Unity announced a new pricing plan whereby you would pay per install. Initially, this was all installs, where immediately someone was like I am mad at this developer. I will delete and reinstall their game consistently. There was also just some like that is all kind of like misguided. I think the really shitty stuff was like they had a GitHub repository with all the versions of the license, and they used to say, and they tried to take away your ability to they used to say that you could hold to the license that you had when you're either on the version of the engine that your game was built on or that it released on, something like that. They tried to get rid of that stealthily. No one was having that. There was also a bunch of other little stuff in there. But yeah, basically every small developer is like, fuck you. Right. And immediately started making plans. Like, I didn't even know Godot is an open source game engine. Apparently.
I do know Godot. Yeah. Godot is an open source engine. Game Maker. I was like, don't go to Game Maker, you guys. Game Maker's a fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People, Unreal, right?
Unreal is crazy. That I was like, it's funny because really where I live, right? Basically every game is Unity, right? It is really rare, really hard to find a game that is not Unity. We published games from Unity, Game Maker, and Unreal, and Game Maker and Unreal just give you so many fucking issues. It is kind of obscene. But the issue is that most people learn on Unity. It's kind of just like the default way to sort of approach things, and that makes it complicated and interesting, I guess, to go for a kind of price hike in this way. I think the installs thing was absolutely fundamentally ridiculous. It's just like there are so many pieces that, and it's ridiculous in a way that's like anybody who understands the industry would also agree. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sort of sense. You kind of can't even really see where it makes sense. Like people compared this a lot to the OGL thing, and I was like, this is not like the OGL thing. The OGL thing I understood, right? I understood that Wizards wanted to they wanted to do the thing that Blizzard did with Dota and Warcraft Reforged, right? Which was say, you know what, this insane IP came out of our game, and we didn't have any right to it, and I want to cut back on that. So we're going to change the OGL in order to make it so that Critical Role, right, has to pay us better, basically, right? Shitty, but understandable. This one, I'm like, what is the plan?
The thing I have heard
Like,
is that what they were thinking about was mobile games, mobile
yeah,
games that have like large user bases, many of which don't pay anything, and they thought they could like peel off that. And to their credit, the numbers that they have changed everything to, I think, better targets that use case.
mm,
So maybe that'll work out for them. Lou in the chat says you killed mobile companies. Yeah, they've upped the revenue. It's like in a 12-month look back, you have to make over $1 million in order for like the new terms to apply, which that makes some amount of sense to me. I think that I mean this. My high school biology teacher used to had this thing. It's like trust is like a porcelain doll, right? You break it and like you can glue it back together, but it's never going to be exactly the same, right? Like,
oof.
And so I think people are gonna I think Unity's people are probably not gonna be as happy with Unity. I can't imagine like it was such a quick walk back that I assume that like there's gonna be a bunch of people who just like I can't be bothered to like move over, but like people might be like, oh, I guess I'll check out Godot on the next one, right? So
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely real. I guess we'll sort of see where it ends up. It's interesting because engine stuff is it's so B2B, but this picked up a lot with kind of like consumers, right?
yeah,
It kind of became like a big like movement, which on one hand I'm sort of okay with this. I'm inherently skeptical of movements like this just because I always think I think they're reductive, right? This is kind of my critique of any version of like I don't know, so many of these gamer controversies have kind of happened and I always push back against them, right? Like the Blizzard stuff or what's another one? Hogwarts Legacy or whatever, but there's something about this one being driven from sort of these indie developers, right? That I think mattered and makes a big difference. So, yeah.
yep. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. I guess.
We'll see, indeed. I am glad that they changed because holy fuck, that was
Oh yeah.
big crazy.
The other thing I wanted to bring up towards the end of the podcast is buddy, how much do you think about the Roman Empire?
I think about the Roman Empire all the time. Are you kidding?
Are you not familiar with this topic du jour?
Yeah, I love getting destroyed by Goths, Mango. Are you come on? I actually don't know why this is when did this become the topic du jour? I've seen the memes, but I don't actually understand the etymology of it.
So, I think there's a couple layers to this, right? Like, the thing that happened is like the origination of this meme is apparently on TikTok. There's this trend of girls asking women asking their boyfriends, husbands, fiancés, how much do you think about the Roman Empire, and getting back answers that astonish them, right? Like it's like almost every day, it's like you know that kind of thing. It's like people and there's I think a bunch of different interpretations of this. I have heard basically like such a huge cross section of people respond to this meme and talk about it. There's just like this is like it had a much larger cultural frame than I even expected, right? Everybody from like I've heard like conservative podcast hosts to like food YouTubers talk about this meme. I think there's a part of this that's like there's some of this is like serious talk about like about like what this means about the culture, because there's like a 70 different versions of this, right? Like, and I think that's why it's like, because like the Roman Empire is kind of pretty universally applicable, right? There's kind of like there's stock standard kind of like, the Roman Empire was is like a thing that like men in general are into in the same way they're into any kind of like large military thing, right?
Sure.
Like, some guy might know every single kind of like small arm in World War II. Some other guy knows, the all about the testudo formation, right, in Rome. There's also this aspect of like, are we at the end of the American Empire? Is that due to decadence, right?
Oh my God.
Hey, there's also like the aspect that's like, Rome very famously had a lot of like kind of like informal, non-stigmatized homosexual relationships is, I guess, the most gentle way to put it. And some people are like, this proves that the Roman Empire was like, was like good, right? And some people are like, no, that was at the end of the empire, and this is, the fact that we are like this is indicative of the decadence of the West and why the West is falling. And then there's also the kind of like, oh, well, actually, Rome was terrible because slaves, right? Like, stuff about democracy. There's like so much in this fucking stew that I think you can just pick whichever angle you want on it. And I think that's why it's such like a topic du jour.
Yeah, I so funnily enough, okay, you have hit me where I live, which is to say that it is one of my like history like things that pisses me off, right? That people don't understand is the idea that the Roman Empire fell because of decadence. And I know exactly where this comes from, which is why I guess we're going to talk about this. Have you ever read The Rise and Fall or the not the Rise and Fall, like the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, right?
No.
This is like the most famous book on it.
So funnily enough, Rome is one of the areas of history that I am not particularly interested in. So,
okay.
When my girlfriend
The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is a book that was published in the 1700s, but it's sort of in the same way that we might think of, I don't know, like, are there any big history books that like are like definitive works on a thing that you could think about, right? I'm thinking about how maybe the one I'm thinking about is like Fire in the Whatever. It's the book on the Vietnam War. Vietnam book Fire. What is it called? History something. It's called something. Fire in the Lake, right? Fire in the Lake is a book that is it's like the definitive history of the Vietnam War in a lot of places, right? If you're going to take a class on the Vietnam War, you're going to read this book, kind of thing. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is a book that is like that, but it's from the 1700s, so it has a lot of bad history in it, right? That like modern historians would disagree with. But it comes away with this thesis that the reason that the Roman Empire kind of fell was the loss of he called it virtue, right? Virtue being sort of this idea that like, this is sort of the Enlightenment, right? This is like late 1700s, the French Revolution, the American Revolution are happening. And this idea that like citizens have to be invested in their republics in order for the republic to kind of live. And what happened in Rome is that like citizens lost that virtue. And that gets bastardized into Rome became decadent or whatever, right? It became this decadent place where people just became like these hedonistic, crazy whatever, and there was no virtue, right? The idea is that decadence replaces the virtue, and that's why sort of Rome fell. So both of those are sort of bad history takes. The virtue one actually makes a certain amount of sense, but like maybe less in like an argumentative thesis way, because mostly what people don't understand about Rome is the empire was around for so fucking long that like the parts of the empire that are at its most decadence are hundreds of years before it actually falls. Do you know what I mean? Right?
Yeah,
like,
no, and as I understand it, kind of like Rome kind of like very gradually fell, right? Like historians have a date that they call like the end of the Roman Empire, but it's like this, it's kind of like a gradient that happens as like, things fall into disrepair and whatnot.
Yeah, like I mean, when did Rome get sacked by the Goths? When did Rome get sacked? Okay, so that's in 1410. When did Constantine split the empire? Okay, 326. I'm trying to think. These are the moments, right, that people say Constantine splits the empire. You have the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire goes on to be the Byzantines and then the Ottomans, and is basically fine, until the early 1900s, right? The Visigoths sacking Rome is like a big decline of the Roman Empire moment. Constantine severing the empire, but it's like even those are 126 years apart, right? Constantine cuts the empire in half, and it still lives for 100 and it still lives for like 125 years,
Yeah.
even if between these two moments that we think of as being the decline, right? The fall of the Roman Empire
Right.
is Rome gets sacked, Constantine splits the empire in half. The idea that there are 100 years, a century passes between these two moments is absolutely incredible, right? And I think that that's like a big piece of where like people misinterpret this kind of lore. There's also this thing about, like, do you know the thing about hard men, weak
Oh,
men, soft
yeah.
men, or
It's
whatever this theme?
hard men create easy times create soft men create hard times.
Yeah, this is also why this is wrong. I actually that meme is funny for a lot of reasons. It's one of these, like, it's kind of like a right wing, meme. The idea that, like, oh, soft men, create like these terrible sorts of, like, whatever. And there is some truth to that in certain situations, right? For instance, a place where I would say that is true is American presidents, right? The founding father. American history is complicated in this way, but like the first set of presidents are universally founding fathers. They are people who can, like, date back to the American Revolution. Even Andrew Jackson, who we would probably not say is a good president, he enlists with the Continental Army at 17 years old, and he becomes president pretty late in his career. But what happens is, after this flight of the true founding fathers, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, this group of presidents, right? You get into these sort of politician presidents, right? Who are universally pretty bad, and this is sort of the run up to the Civil War, right? James Buchanan, or is something like, you don't even remember these names because they're just so, like, they're so kind of like, I don't know,
Willard
weird.
Fillmore.
Yeah, exactly. Like these kinds of presidents. There are probably good presidents. I like James Polk, for instance.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know, but I like presidents. I like Andrew Jackson, but, like, in the same way that I like, I don't know, Walter White.
But I see what you're saying, right? Like every
But
once in
yeah,
a
so the
while,
idea is that, like,
there's like a war or some large conflict that forces us to recenter kind of our belief in what, like, like kind of like the founding virtues of the thing, right? Like the Civil War, I'd argue World War II does this, right? Like we get Dwight after
oh,
that,
absolutely. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and
But
so
as we
and
get
that's
away from those, we get more politician-y, less great presidents, right? Is that your
yeah,
thesis?
and the reason I bring that up is because think of the time scale, right? The time scale of a human life and the amount of time that someone can claim sort of one of these great moments in history, right? Um, is actually like pretty fucking short, right? We went through maybe 20, 30 years where we had these founding father presidents, and then we transitioned into these kind of second generation politician-y presidents who, kind of fucked the nation up into the civil, and led it into the Civil War, basically. That happened over the course of 50 years, maybe, right? The Roman Empire, if you want to say that, like, Rome was kind of forged by hard men, you're probably talking about kind of the realm of great Roman conquests, which was happening probably, like Caesar would maybe be like the easiest person we could pinpoint or whatever. But Caesar was in 44 BC, 400 years before something like, the sack of Rome by the Visigoths, 300 years before Constantine split the empire in half or whatever. And it's like, that can't possibly be the case just because so much time has passed between these things. Anyway, that's my Roman Empire. There you go. Here's my weird history spiels for the day.
When
for the podcast.
let's say when my girlfriend asked me about it, my response was, I don't think about the Roman Empire that much, but I do think about the Cold War a bunch.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, I do get that because I like the Roman Empire, and I think it is underutilized specifically for like D&D stuff. This is part of why one of my you played in this setting, right? I had this setting in college called Saran, which was a big great empire of a bunch of, like the typical like D&D races or whatever. That's sort of based on the Roman Empire, because I like the idea of there's a Rome that, like we're not sort of playing in fantasy medieval, lots of kingdoms or whatever. We're playing in fantasy Rome kind of thing. Does it make sense?
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there's I don't know, there's stuff there.
I think part of the reason why it's less utilized is because something like Rome is known for its kind of like large scale warfare. And like individual adventures don't fit as well into that. Obviously, there's like the Iliad and the Odyssey are the kind of like the counterpoints to that, which technically is Greece, not Rome, but same classical adventurism. But like the medieval era had a lot more kind of like less top down kind of like empire level organization, I think, and I think that that's part of why like the fundamental D&D fantasy, right, is like a but it's a bunch of normals that strike out to like make fame and fortune and like make it work.
Yeah,
and that is less at home in like a more highly structured society. I don't know how true it is, but like Rome is kind of like presented to be is maybe the right way to put it.
Yeah, Rome is also a big center for this like great man history, right? Like if I think of somebody like Scipio Africanus, right, like the Punic Wars, we would maybe think of as being this is maybe like the classicest of most classic sort of like Rome or whatever, but he's a general leading an army of 100,000 people. Hannibal, right? Same thing, right? A general leading this huge, gigantic army. And there's a lot of cool stuff that I feel like you could translate to D&D. Hannibal leading war elephants over the Alps, for instance. He's like, that's like part and parcel of D&D shit, right? But yeah, I definitely agree with you that like the heroes on the ground of Rome are a little different than the heroes of the ground in like the medieval era.
I also wonder how much of that is like, like classic D&D isn't maybe so much directly the Middle Ages as it is like living out the Arthurian legend in a way.
Interesting.
Because like those stories are kind of like individual knight stories, right? Like it's not like D&D is trying to be, right, like a miniature version of like Crusader Kings, right, which kind of like more accurately kind of like goes to the history. It's about like those adventures which are embodied by like the Arthurian myth, and obviously the Tolkien who built on top of it, like kind of merged like World War I with the Arthurian myth. So to that point, I think that like building a D&D game off of, again, the Greek part of the classics, off of like the Iliad and the Odyssey, like those myths I think could work. And I think maybe part of that too is that like a lot of it has like a lot of like direct intermingling with the gods, which is like a weird like D&D kind of typically doesn't like get into, but I think that's
it's also a little complicated because there's stuff about technology as well, right?
Yeah.
Obviously like Bronze Age to Iron Age kind of, the advent of castles, right, is very different. The kind of cavalry warfare, right, that's happening is very different because you have kind of 1,000 years between something like the Iliad and something like what would I say? What's like a good medieval battle? Agincourt, maybe, right? Like, like these big medieval battles that just happen under different sorts of terms.
Yeah.
But I also think that like in the same way that medieval stuff borrows from, for instance, pirates, or like Renaissance pirates,
right,
gets co-opted into sort of medieval settings all the time. I like the idea of co-opting Roman stuff into D&D settings. And maybe I could make the argument that something like Cheliax in Pathfinder makes a closer attempt towards something like that. But I don't know, you know.
Yeah. No, there's bits and pieces of it, right? Like, I mean, to your point, right? Like, D&D also occasionally tries to like borrow from like samurai and the old west, right? Like, and like maybe the Victorian era, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Honestly, I also think that it borrows a lot from, like Greek stuff. And like the Iliad is like the 7th century BC. Like this kind of, I don't think it predates the Roman Empire, right? When did Romulus and Remus found Rome? So yeah, so the founding of Rome is 753 BC, right? Which is right around when the Iliad comes out. Um, and so I think that like that kind of, I don't know, there's something there, right? But I'm
yeah.
surprised that you're not a Roman boy.
Well, I went through like, I think my Rome phase happened before I cared enough to like actually learn about this kind of thing, right? Because like
Sure.
my Rome phase largely happened while I was playing Rome Total War One, when I was like a little too young to actually like care about like reading about it.
Yeah.
High school was like a big Napoleonic phase for me, and I used to know a lot about the Napoleonic Wars. But like my interest up until like relatively recently was mostly in kind of like individual, not like technical aspects of warfare, right? Like I
Mhm.
knew a lot about like Napoleonic era artillery because I found that fascinating. I did not care as much about like the Napoleonic kind of like Napoleon as an emperor who spat on the divine right of kings is like a political thing, right? Like I only know that stuff because it was part of like my history classes, not because it was of personal interest
Yeah,
for me.
that's interesting. Napoleon is actually sort of a blind spot for me, to be with you. There's some stuff I know about Napoleon because I know a lot about ships from that era. Shout out to the HMS Victory, and it's it's 44 ships, boys. There's that's a little joke for the chat. They'll understand. But like Napoleon itself, it is yeah, I never like got into, or I like, to be honest, I probably couldn't explain to you like the most important aspects of Napoleon's reign or whatever. But like I could do that for the Civil War, right? Or World War II, because I
Right.
know a lot about those two. This is part of why I get so frustrated with like when I was talking about the lost cause a couple of weeks ago, right? Like because I know a lot about Civil War history, I
Right.
happen to know a lot about the bad history that goes into it, right?
Yeah.
Or because I know a lot about World War II history, I understand the bad history that goes into people talking about the fucking atomic bombs coming out of, Oppenheimer.
Yeah. No. There was uh an interesting thing I had heard recently about that I need to go follow up on. Somebody brought up that like like the Japanese estimates were like of their own kind of like deaths were like in like the like were like horrendously high as well. Which kind of like also puts like in terms of like gaming out like what the what the actual end state of that would be. Um, but yeah, no, it's I agree with you. I know a little bit more politically about like the kind of like stuff that happened. Like something I found out recently is um somebody was making like a joke about Wisconsin. Apparently, like a lot of like the fundamental eugenic stuff that gets adopted by the Nazis comes out of like Wisconsin. Like there's some guy, there's like some
Oh
guy.
yeah, like this is a big thing, right? People really misunderstand the nature of, I mean, this is pretty brutal, but pretty misunderstand the nature of the Holocaust. Like if you were to if you ask somebody, when does the genocide of the Jews begin, right? Most people would probably say something like 1933 because they know that's when Hitler rises to power. But Hitler, in a technical sense, wasn't genocidal until essentially 1941. There's actually a movie about this that is pretty good on HBO called Conspiracy, where they kind of give up on they kind of give up on non-extermination
They were
methods
gonna
of
like move them to Zimbabwe or something like that. Like
yeah, that was a
which is
big
like a
thing.
plot point in Attack on Titan, the anime. Which is it's its own weirdness, but yeah, like there were relocation plans. Also just kind of like the genesis of a lot of this stuff, right? Like I think a lot of people don't know about like say United States, right? Are you familiar with the case Buck v. Bell?
Is it the one where, well, because I know that there's a bunch of sterilizations that happen
Yeah,
in the early 19th.
Yeah, this is where sterilization of the mentally infirm is held to be constitutional, and the quote that comes out of it from Justice Holmes is 3 generations of imbeciles is enough, or something like that. Um, yeah, yeah,
Woof. Yeah, I mean that was too slow for the Nazis. They did actually sterilize
oh yeah,
quite a lot of the Jews, but part of it is just like doing these things on industrial scales is really tough, really
yeah,
hard. But anyway, I would recommend that movie Conspiracy from HBO. It's got my boy Stanley Tucci in there, which is really all. It's like Kenneth Branagh, Stanley Tucci, but it is the meeting of the high end of sort of like Nazi intelligentsia, where they literally just are sitting down and talking through, okay, what is our plan? How are we going to do this? How, like, how are we going to end up accomplishing this kind of goal? And I think that's a version of history that people don't tell a lot, right? Which is the process, right? And yeah. Anyway, rough stuff.
yeah. All right. Well, with that happy note, I
Yeah,
think we.
yeah, I know.
If you'd like to email us about anything you talked about on this podcast, from Astrea to eugenics, you can email us at somedirtsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@somedirtsplaygames.com. You can follow us or watch these on twitch.tv and YouTube live. It's twitch.tv/somedirtsplaygames and youtube.com/@somedirtsplaygames. Rate and review us wherever you find podcasts. That's everything I have. Buddy, you have anything else you'd like to promote?
Nothing besides Astrea, which is out now on PC. Go play it. Have fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, in that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.